In April 1945, as the German Reich collapsed under the combined pressure of the Allied advance, the American Strategic Bombing Survey prepared its final, most critical operation. The war in Europe was nearly over, but the United States urgently needed answers that could shape the post-war world. How strong had Germany truly been? How much industrial power remained hidden within its borders? And, most importantly, what could America learn before shifting its focus toward Imperial Japan? For this task, Washington selected Paul H. Nitze, a brilliant economist, strategist, and one of the sharpest minds in the U.S. war apparatus. Nitze had already helped analyze the impact of Allied bombing on German industry, but now he was sent into the heart of the defeated Reich to interrogate the man who knew more about Germany's industrial system than anyone alive, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production. Speer had taken control of Germany's war industries in 1942 and dramatically increased arms output despite devastating Allied bombing. His reputation fascinated American analysts. How had Germany managed to produce so much while being bombed almost daily? Was German industrial efficiency really superior, or was it a myth built on propaganda? On April 23, 1945, Nitze arrived at the interrogation center where Speer was being held. The atmosphere was heavy. The war was collapsing, cities lay in ruins, and the Nazi leadership had fragmented. Yet Speer remained calm, composed, and almost eager to talk. He believed he could influence the historical record, shaping how the world viewed him and the regime he served. For the U.S., this interrogation was not just an academic exercise, it was a race against time. Washington knew the post-war world would be defined by industrial capacity, how nations mobilize technology, manpower, and resources. Understanding how Germany had functioned under Speer could reveal the secrets of modern war. From the moment Nitze entered the room, he realized he was not dealing with an ordinary prisoner. Speer was articulate, highly educated, and one of the sharpest minds in the U.S. war apparatus. Nitze had already helped analyze the impact of Allied bombing on German industry, but now he was sent into the heart of the defeated Reich to interrogate the man who knew more about Germany's industrial system than anyone alive. What neither man knew at that moment was that this 7-day interrogation would reveal something far more important. America's true industrial strength was beyond anything the Germans had ever imagined. The numbers they were about to compare would shock even Speer, who once believed Germany's war factories were the envy of the world. By the time Nitze's questioning ended, America would uncover the single greatest strategic advantage it possessed and understand why Germany's defeat was ultimately inevitable, no matter how long the war lasted. Albert Speer began the interrogation by presenting a confident picture of Germany's war economy. He described how he took over the armaments ministry in February 1942, inheriting a chaotic system paralyzed by political interference, overlapping authorities, and inefficiencies. Speer portrayed himself as the technocrat who brought order, discipline, and rational planning to Hitler's war engine. According to Speer, German production increased dramatically under his leadership. Aircraft output tripled between 1942 and 1944. Tank production reached record highs. Ammunition factories operated day and night. Speer's narrative suggested that he had performed a miracle in the face of devastating strategic bombing. And on the surface, the numbers seemed impressive. But Nitze quickly noticed something. Speer was comparing German production only to its own earlier failures, not to the scale of the Allied effort. Speer admitted that Germany had failed to fully mobilize in the early years of the war. Luxury goods were still being produced as late as 1941. Skilled workers remained in civilian industries.
The Nazi leadership had not believed the war would last long enough to require total mobilization. It was only after catastrophic losses in the Soviet Union that Germany began to reorganize for long-term conflict. Nitze found the contradictions fascinating. Speer often emphasized his reforms, but glossed over the catastrophic shortages Germany faced in oil, aluminum, copper, rubber, and machine tools, shortages that no amount of administrative skill could defeat. He acknowledged that Germany had been fighting with a fraction of the industrial resources of its enemies. More startling was Speer's admission that German efficiency was often a myth. Production was not centralized. Instead, it existed in a maze of competing agencies: Göring's four-year plan, Himmler's SS labor system, the Wehrmacht's procurement offices, and numerous private industrial giants, all jockeying for influence. Corruption, infighting, and overlapping control plagued the system. Even Speer's celebrated armaments miracle relied heavily on forced labor. Millions of prisoners, foreign workers, and concentration camp inmates, whose conditions ranged from brutal to lethal. This workforce was large, but not skilled, not efficient, and not sustainable. Nitze pressed Speer on the impact of Allied bombing, expecting perhaps exaggerated claims of resilience. Instead, Speer admitted something shocking. By 1944, he believed Germany's defeat was inevitable. Bombing had wrecked transportation systems, destroyed fuel refineries, and cut off critical supply lines. Factories could still produce weapons, but they could no longer deliver them to the front. This revelation stunned Nitze, confirming that Germany's industrial collapse had begun long before its armies surrendered. But nothing prepared Speer for what came next, when Nitze finally laid out the full scale of America's own production effort. Speer, the architect of Germany's wartime economy, suddenly realized that he had never understood the true extent of American industrial power.
After days of hearing Speer's explanations, Nitze finally opened his briefcase and began presenting the United States wartime production reports. What followed was one of the most dramatic moments in any wartime interrogation, a psychological and strategic blow that Speer did not see coming. Nitze placed chart after chart on the table. At first, Speer leaned in with polite curiosity, but as the numbers grew larger and larger, his expression changed. His confidence eroded. The miracle he had described for days suddenly appeared small, almost insignificant. The numbers were staggering. The United States had produced 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone, more than Germany produced in the entire war. Speer blinked, stunned. He had always believed Germany's aircraft output had been impressive under his reforms, but America's factories, operating at peak capacity, were producing fighters, bombers, transports, and naval aircraft at a speed that defied belief. Then Nitze presented the tank figures. The U.S. had built nearly 90,000 tanks and self-propelled guns compared to roughly 46,000 German armored vehicles of all types. And while Germany struggled with shortages of fuel to operate its armored divisions, the United States had enough petroleum output to supply not only its own forces, but also the British Commonwealth and even the Soviet Union via Lend-Lease. The artillery numbers were even more overwhelming. The U.S. had delivered over 370,000 artillery pieces, dwarfing German output. Ammunition? The U.S. produced billions of rounds, so much that American troops in the field often commented that running out of ammunition was almost impossible. Then came the steel and industrial capacity comparison. Nitze revealed that America had produced over 88 million tons of steel in 1943, while Germany produced barely 30 million tons, much of it disrupted by bombing. The U.S. outproduced Germany in aluminum, copper, high-octane fuel, transports, ships, and machine tools, every material necessary to wage modern war. Speer was visibly shaken. He knew Germany was outmatched, but never like this. He whispered at one point, "We never had a chance." Then Nitze pointed out something even more astonishing. The U.S. had achieved these numbers while still maintaining massive civilian production. America had not fully mobilized its society, and yet it had still outproduced every Axis nation combined. Speer was silent. For the first time, he understood the magnitude of the industrial giant Germany had awakened. Hitler's dreams of global domination had been based on a fundamental miscalculation. He believed the U.S. was soft, divided, and incapable of sustaining a major war. Instead, America had unleashed a level of production the world had never witnessed. The interrogation room fell quiet. The myth of German industrial superiority had been shattered completely.
With the numbers laid bare, Nitze turned the interrogation toward the key question that had defined the Strategic Bombing Survey. Did Allied bombing actually work? And if so, how much did it shape Germany's defeat? Speer, now humbled by the overwhelming American numbers, spoke with more honesty than before. He admitted that Allied bombing had been far more destructive than many German reports suggested at the time. While individual factories could be rebuilt or dispersed, the real target, the transportation network, had been the war's decisive turning point. By mid-1944, the bombing of rail yards, bridges, and fuel refineries had created a cascading collapse. Coal could not reach the power stations. Iron ore could not reach the steel mills. Finished weapons sat in factories with no locomotives to move them. The Luftwaffe, already outnumbered, lost thousands of aircraft on the ground due to fuel shortages. Speer described the situation in devastating clarity. Refineries destroyed, no aviation fuel. Aircraft grounded, no air defense. Railways wrecked, no movement of tanks or ammunition. Synthetic rubber plants bombed, no tires for trucks. Ball bearing factories hit, machinery shortages everywhere. Germany, he said, was dying not from lack of weapons, but from lack of mobility, energy, and coordination. Nitze listened carefully. The U.S. had debated whether bombing cities or factories was more effective. Speer's testimony confirmed that the real weakness had been Germany's fragile transportation and fuel system, not necessarily its armaments factories. Then Speer made a chilling confession. He had tried, in secret, to sabotage Hitler's orders for a final scorched earth destruction of German industry. In the final months of the war, Hitler wanted every remaining factory blown up so they would not fall into Allied hands. Speer claimed he resisted the order because he feared Germany would starve in the post-war era. Whether his motives were humanitarian or self-serving remains debated, but the admission fascinated Nitze. It showed that even Speer understood the scale of German collapse. He knew the war was lost months before the final surrender. The interrogation revealed something else. Germany's industrial system had never been capable of matching the combined might of the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Even without bombing, Germany was structurally inferior in raw materials, manpower, and technology. Yet Speer had prolonged the war by making Germany fight harder than its economy could support, delaying the inevitable but never changing the outcome. The 7-day interrogation had reached its core truth. Industrial power, not ideology, not tactics, not even battlefield victories, was the ultimate weapon of the Second World War. When Paul Nitze completed his interviews with Albert Speer, he returned to Washington with one of the most valuable strategic insights of the entire war. He had not only exposed the weaknesses of the German war machine, he had uncovered the true scale of American industrial supremacy. Nitze's final report was blunt. The United States possessed an industrial base so vast that no Axis power could have matched it, even if the war had lasted another decade. The numbers spoke for themselves. America built 2/3 of all Allied military equipment, produced more ships than all Axis nations combined, supplied the Soviet Union with 400,000 trucks, thousands of locomotives, and millions of tons of fuel, maintained full civilian consumer production while still building the world's largest Navy, Air Force, and Army. Germany, by comparison, had been waging war with an economy that was never truly mobilized for global conflict. Nitze concluded that America's greatest strength was not its battlefield strategy. It was its ability to turn factories, workers, railroads, and resources into military power on a scale the world had never seen. This industrial supremacy shaped everything: D-Day, the air war over Europe, the Pacific Island Campaign, and ultimately the ability to fight a two-ocean war thousands of miles from home. Speer, reflecting on what he had learned, reportedly told interrogators that Germany could have never won a long war against the United States. Its leadership had failed to understand the industrial age. They had believed courage and ideology could overcome machinery and mass production. They were wrong. After the war, Nitze's insights helped shape American policy for decades. His understanding of industrial mobilization became central during the Cold War, influencing arms planning, nuclear strategy, and economic defense measures. He had seen firsthand how wars were decided not only on battlefields, but in factories, shipyards, and research labs. The interrogation also reshaped historical understanding. The myth of German efficiency collapsed under the weight of numbers. The truth was clear: Germany had fought fiercely, but America had fought inexhaustibly. The 7-day interrogation of Albert Speer became more than a report. It became a lesson for all future wars. Industrial power is destiny. He who controls production controls victory. By the time Nitze closed his files, one fact stood above all others: America's war industries were not just stronger, they were overwhelming, and once fully mobilized, they made defeat all but impossible.